Hello, friends. I'm Byron Belitsos, and welcome to our second podcast in this series of ECI podcasts, which we're going to do every month. So, in this particular podcast, I want to say just a couple things as background, which is that, as you all know, all of you who are following us, even if you're not following us, I'd like you to know that ECI and its partners are in the midst of an operational upgrade, you might say, because we're trying to do a world parliament, a provisional world parliament, at a much expanded scale this time. And what we have done, as you may know, is hold these provisional world parliaments and have done it since 1982. But the world crisis is such that it has to be done on a much bigger scale this time. So we have planned out having a PWP, as we call it, Provisional World Parliament, in 2025 in the spring. So this is a kind of part of the buildup for that through these podcasts, and in particular, today we're going to focus on the fact that there are kind of two big parts of what we do. One part is bringing in organizational allies into coalition, and that's of course nonprofits and human rights organizations, and of course World Federalist organizations in coalition with us. And also, by the way, that includes countries that ratify the Earth Constitution. So those would be pioneering countries that would be in this coalition. So that's kind of the collective part of it. But the other part of it is the individual part of it, obviously, which is recruiting world citizens. People who, as I like to call it, people who are world centric, world centered thinkers. They're not just centered on their country or their family or themselves. They're looking at the planet as a whole, and we kind of have two groups within that as well. We have, for us at least, we have, under the authority of the Constitution, we have created world electoral districts. And as you know, there are 1,000 world electoral districts, and you as an individual can start a world electoral district, or you can join a WED, as we call it, and that makes you, in a way, your world citizenship is expressed in that way. And the other way to do it is to just become a world citizen and declare yourself a world citizen. And that brings us to our special guest today, is David Gallup. Many of you know David as the very well known human rights attorney based in Washington D.C., who is who's the general counsel and president of WSA, which is World Service Authority. And that organization is the administrative arm of the WCG. We do a lot of acronyms. That's the World Citizen Government. And a World Citizen Government was founded by the illustrious Gary Davis in 1953, who declared himself sort of the first world citizen in, I think, 1947 or around that time. And then he recruited, through his charisma and through his activism, over 1 million people who registered for the very first registry of world citizens. And since then, he grew his organization, then turned it over to David. So David has a very important pedigree that he's bringing forward. And so, point being that part of what we do at ECI and WCPA is we build coalition of organizations, but also we build the world citizen um, pool of world citizens, and they are the elector. They're the electorate of the world parliament. So we're building our electorate, and so this is important work. And so in this connection, I want to invite everybody to go to worldcitizengov.org. That's worldcitizengov.org. Sign up to be official world citizen. You get, of course, the well-known world citizen passport, and you see one just behind David's desk. And there's what it looks like. You can also get a world citizen birth certificate and world citizen card and other world citizen indicators. from his organization, very small fees. Support him with doing this, pay the fees, and express your world citizenship. So we're going to talk about that today, and I just want to conclude by saying that we're in a dire global crisis, and the timing is good for what we're doing. So our objective is provisional world government, as we call it, and a big part of that is provisional world parliament. And so again, we need friendly nations, we need friendly organizations, we need to build coalition, and then we need to build world electoral districts who will elect the delegates to the world parliament. But it's not just political, we're not just the electorate. We are the people, we are the citizens. And so I want to start by asking David to explain to us what is really meant. It's kind of a big phrase, world citizen government, and it's actually formally it's the world government of world citizens. And in what sense is that a world government, since it doesn't have a constitution per se?
Sure. Thank you, Byron, and thank you, Glenn, for having me come onto the podcast and speak with you and speak to the public about our joint work together. Specifically to your question about this term world citizen government, or formerly world government of world citizens, the idea is to have a government of, by, and for the people of planet Earth, meaning that we as voters, as citizens, participate in that government because it comes from us. And the reason why we use citizen as part of it is to say that we have rights and duties in that government and with each other. We have, and that's what makes us world citizens, the exercise and engagement of our rights and duties in a global framework or in the global community. We are members, so we should be proud of being part of the human family. So there's their membership component. And then there's a participation component, which is really, when it comes to our work together, voting to support the Constitution for the Federation of the Earth. Of course, there's other ways that we can participate, whether it's in the Provisional World Parliament, whether it's just helping our fellow world citizens with whatever their needs might be, agriculturally, economically, socially, whatever. But so the underlying part of your question was, well, how can this be a world citizen government if there is no constitution yet? Well, this is why we're wanting to work together, because we feel like what we're doing is providing a government in microcosm, meaning we're providing tools like the World Passport behind me, tools that people can use to exercise some of their rights, but not yet all of their rights. And we want to make sure that every human being on planet Earth can fully exercise all their rights with equity, with parity, with justice, with peace, which we can't in the current nation state system that we have. So even though it's acting not yet as a fully functioning world governmental system, we're providing to start those services. Just like I might say, similarly, the Earth Constitution is the tool, the document that we need, the legal document that we need to provide the basis, the legal basis, and the institutions, in addition to some of the institutions that we're also working on, such as a World Court of Human Rights, that will make this government fully functioning.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce Glen Martin. We all know Glen is the president of WCPA and of ECI, and Glen is wearing the flag colors of the colors of the flag of Venezuela, where he just was, and where he was building world electoral districts and much more there. Maybe you could say a bit about that. But Glen, do you have a response to David on?
Yeah, I think David is right on target. That we affirm the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but as David's website points out, there's an additional declaration made by the UN about environmental rights that are not in the original declaration, and I think we affirm that as well. But there is a third declaration that needs to be there, and that is the right to peace. Right? And the UN has, as you probably know, the UN has dallied with that in 1990, first time in 1984, but then 1997, the then General Secretary of the UNESCO came out with a document where they tried to promote the right to peace, and he got put down for it. He said, you're exceeding your authority. This is, and according to Douglas Roche, who wrote a book about this, Douglas Roche was a Canadian minister to the UN at the time. The UN the UN delegate said, how can we have a right to peace? Because then we would not be able to start a war. So that kind of, locates our situation. But we, the citizens of Earth, have got to have a world system in which we affirm our human dignity and the whole panoply of our human rights, or we're not going to have a planet in a century. It's as simple as that. We've got to have democratic world government, or we won't be having a planet. So I agree with David 100%. This is the energy behind our growing coalition.
And I have a follow-up to that, to Glen's point. This is your last point, Glen, about survival, our survival as a human species, and the survival of the planet. I mean, one of the last things that Gary Davis was teaching me as sort of my guru, you might say, or spiritual guru or whatever, wisdom giver, was that there are really two important questions now in the 21st century. Who are we? And how do we ensure survival of humanity and the earth? And if you can't say that you're a world citizen, then we're going to keep falling into the trap of we versus they, the divide and conquer rather than unite and prosper mentality. And if you can't answer the question of how do we ensure survival of humanity and the earth, then we're all gone. If the earth dies, we die with it, right? So this is why the Earth Constitution, which provides the tools to us for working together sustainably, both on all the different levels, economic, legal, social, political, if we choose it. It's really just a political choice that we have to make, and our advocacy today will be what allows us to have a sustainable earth tomorrow.
Yeah, excellent. I couldn't agree more. I just want to point out that my new book that's about to come out April 15th is called Human Dignity and World Order. And it points out that the current world system is not based on human dignity. That's part of our problem, right? We want to be world citizens. Recognize everybody as a world citizen, but that means recognizing their dignity and rights, as the UN Universal Declaration puts it. And it's a source of peace and justice and freedom in the world. The current world system denies that dignity, and so absolutely fundamental that we establish as rapidly and as rationally as possible a world system based on human dignity.
I wanted to add in here, if I may, that both of you are alluding really to a spiritual component to this, which is that we're one people and it's one world. And it's like a big brotherhood, a sisterhood of all. And I wonder if either of you might want to speak to that. I know that Gary Davis, really did study with an Indian guru, and in your book, Glen, you have a lot about the spiritual aspect of this. Just start with David, if you want to comment on that element of our work.
Sure. I mean, Gary would always say what was the basis for the founding of this world citizen government, which was one earth, one humanity, and he used to say one God, but that he didn't want to offend people who might not have religious faith, but still believe in respect for the universe or were humanists. So he changed it to either one spirit or one value, and what that value he would define as universal respect for our universal rights, both human and environmental rights. So whether we exist or not on the planet, the earth also has, in a sense, its own rights to exist. So this background spiritual or universal idea of respect and dignity, as Glen was just mentioning, is really an underlying principle of this idea of having a world government that provides common world law, so that you can't get away with, so to speak, killing someone on the streets of Washington, D.C. and killing someone on the streets of Baghdad and getting away with it just because you're wearing some kind of military uniform and have been told this is what you need to do, right? Here's a gun and go do it, right? So there's this component, which I think is really important, because intellectually, people might say, well, I get why there should be a world constitution, but it just doesn't touch my heart necessarily. And they might get what it means to be even a world citizen, or this, this idea of being a good citizen, but it may not touch their heart or even their mind, so to speak. But this idea of, we have this feeling of love and dignity for each other. That is one of the things I think that we can do working together to really raise awareness among everyone, not just older people, but the youth, everybody around the world who might come to us from that perspective, where the sort of intellectual perspective of world federalism just may not be enough.
Absolutely. And I just want to add to that. I wrote about Gary's Trinity in my forthcoming book, right? And I used his phrase, one God, one sovereign human being, and one humanity. And Gary deduced from that, as I do, and as Emery Rees did in his 1945 book, The Anatomy of Peace, he deduced from that there is no legitimate middle level. Human beings are sovereign. Human beings are one humanity. We have one value or one dimension of spirituality, God. And there is no, so the sovereignty of the world, of humanity, which is recognized in the Earth Constitution, arises directly from human beings. There is no such thing as a legitimate sovereign nation state.
Yeah, beautiful. And I would add also that the individual is sovereign in the sense that they have a common source. We don't have to say God, but there's a common source from nature, you may say. But also the humanity shares that source. So that's unifies us, makes us one. Yeah. That's intrinsic. So that can be, translated into law, into a constitution, into human rights. But it stands alone as a spiritual principle, a philosophical and spiritual principle. Yeah. And I think we all subscribe to that.
Yeah. So we're each a sovereign person. Sovereign means autonomy, independence. But as a sovereign, what that means, a sovereign person means, is that we're free, ethical, moral beings, right? So we can make ethical choices. And we share this with all humanity, this ability to make ethical choices. So our sovereignty, each of us is a free being who can make those choices, unites us to all of humanity, who are also beings of dignity and freedom.
Beautiful.
No middle ground.
Yeah, I think what makes the Earth Constitution and this idea of at some point a fully functioning world citizen government unique is the ethical principle or basis behind them. The idea that as a world citizen, that means I am respecting, loving, and affirming the inclusivity of humanity and my fellow humans, and that I want to put into effect governmental institutions that will allow us to work together peacefully rather than at war. And you look at the creation, and it's not fully the case, but the creation of almost any government, at least at the national level, it's mostly been through violent means, either to create that section of the earth or whatever that's divided, or to maintain it. With a few exceptions of maybe Costa Rica and Japan that don't allow war in their constitutions, right? But so this idea of the Earth Constitution and this a fully functioning world citizen federal government, you might say, in the end, don't involve any violence whatsoever. It's all coming from our heart and our heart and our head, to work together through peaceful means. And I love that ethical aspect to it. And I guess, Glenn, if you don't mind me stepping in, Byron, to ask a question, I know you're the moderator.
Please go.
Glenn, from a philosophical perspective, how do you, I guess, look at the idea of spirituality or ethics, and how does that link to, I guess I would say, law and government, which in my mind is much more procedural aspects, whereas the ethics or even the idea of dignity and the emotion that is involved in that comes from much more like a personal level. As a philosopher, how do you link those ideas or link those?
Well, you affirm, because it's in on your website, that the UN Universal Declaration principle that law and legitimate government arises from the will of the people, right? And the will of the people is a moral will, right? In fact, Rousseau, the philosopher Rousseau, called it the general will. He
Right.
said, the entire people could be wrong. They could vote for a wrong thing or whatever, but the general will is never wrong because it's the moral dimension of democracy, of the sovereignty of the people. And I think that government now, as it exists now around the world, maybe even Costa Rica, which defines itself as a sovereign nation, government is not based on moral principles. It's based on power and separation and fragmentation and money. Power and money are there behind all governments, and that just coheres with Gary Davis's principle that there is no legitimate middle ground. Governments are not legitimate, morally speaking. Well, what's legitimate, morally speaking, is a nonviolent world order in which we organize ourselves through governmental procedures to allow the possibility of human beings engaging in real dialogue, not propaganda, not ideology. Dialogue is a moral principle, right? Just as nonviolence is a moral principle. So I really don't see a separation. I see that government arises from this ethical, spiritual dimension of human beings. It should arise from it. Right now, it doesn't look like it does because nowhere on earth is government really based on that. It's still based on fragmentation and power and money. The big difference there.
Right. Wasn't it Rousseau who said, all humans are free, yet everywhere they are in chains,
Yeah.
or enslaved.
Yeah.
Right. So I agree with that. But it's the self-imposed prisons that we put ourselves in within the non-United Nations. Right. And I also think his point of having a social contract, if we were going to update that to the 21st century, it would be a global social contract. And that's really what this Constitution is that contract that we have with each other.
Yeah. In fact, I'm not sure I want to derail our conversation into a philosophical one, but it really interests me. The early social contract theorists, starting with Thomas Hobbes, right, who Hobbes had an authoritarian government because he thought human beings were all egoistic and greedy and violent. But Hobbes recognized that beyond the nation state, he's writing in the 17th century, a number of nation states are now being defined according to the Westphalian Principle of 1648. You have all these autonomous states calling themselves sovereign. And he says, Hobbes points out, just as Locke points out, and Spinoza points out, and Rousseau points out, and Kant points out, they all point out that between the nations, there is no law. And therefore, between the nations, there is a war system of violence and immoral relationships. That's really precisely it. That Rousseau, if he lived today, and he even said it because he said between the nations there's only violence. I think all of them, if they live today, they would say it needs to be global. It's the only way. It's, in fact, some scholars call this Hobbes's contradiction. Between the internal of a nation and between nations, there's a big contradiction. It's a war relation between nations. Internally, there may be law and peace. It's a contradiction. And unless we solve that problem, we're dead meat on this planet.
Well said, you guys. And I think we covered that very well. And I think the philosophical dimension is not derailing. It's essential to our work to understand. And I urge our listeners to, rerun this and listen to these, the wisdom of our two guests. Well, David's our main guest and today, but I wanted to maybe address to both of you now that we've established that the personhood is irreducible and humanity is irreducible. These are the two principles. What's in between, the scaffolding, is just, it's not real over time. In our destiny is to have a world federation of the world's people. So I want to ask you guys a little bit more on the practical side of the fact that we have an agreement in our coalition between ECI, WCPA and ECI, and you, David, with your organization to create world citizen IDs, which you already do in your organization, but to kind of add on to that the world citizenship for voting rights that we are establishing through the world electoral districts and through the provisional world parliament. So how are we going to do that? We have an agreement to do that, and what can we say to folks who are like, oh yeah, really, you're going to have world elections? Well, they're going to be hacked. It's not going to work. It's not going to be credible. It's not going to be secure. So what are the kind of the points people need to know about that, which is, a very big project? We start with you, David.
Sure. Well, we're working on a secure, self-sovereign identification. I in the long run, I hope that it will be linked to the blockchain, whatever the blockchain, sustainable blockchain that might be. It may not be Bitcoin, because that's not necessarily sustainable, but some sustainable blockchain, because that's immutable. Once what's the term? The information has been entered into the blockchain, right, it can't be changed. So that if you have an identification that is linked, like through a public and private key onto the blockchain, you can't pretend to be somebody else, or others, whether it's the computer system itself or other members of our world community who are also voters, can verify and say, okay, that is not, that's either just a bot, or that's a rogue factor, that's not a real person. So we'll have embedded in automatically in our world voter identification system proof of humanity, so that each person will have a unique identifier that they can use voting within their 1,000 districts. So I'm in District 118 here in Washington, D.C. So probably the 118 will be part of the identification code. We haven't totally decided exactly what that code will look like, because we're working to make it the best, obviously, code that it can be, to help us to identify ourselves, but also make it easy for people to become voters. It has to be free, obviously, for people to join this. And one of the reasons Glen and I, so Earth Constitution and World Service Authority, are working together on this is because we think that it's so important that the people who are registering through us as world citizens also have this opportunity to say, I'm voting to support that Constitution, and then actually to be able to vote on world issues. I mean, Gary would always say to me, hey, David, we're all governors, meaning that we each have the power to govern our world. We just don't know it necessarily, or we haven't been trained that way. The world voter identification system that we're developing, and we're developing a new database right now that will allow people to register as world citizens, and you might say get their voter ID free along with it, right? At the same time, it's still in process. I can't tell you exactly what it will look like. So if there's any people out in your audience who have particular expertise or interest in this, we would love to hear from you, your ideas to help us to make sure that the system is safe, but it's usable, user-friendly, and that it allows us to do what we want to do in the long run, which is to be able to vote on global issues, to have global referenda, and to, in the end, develop develop out the institutions of the Earth Constitution, to have a fully functioning, not just a provisional world parliament, but finally the world parliament that we need. Because from my reading, and Glen, I'm sure you'll confirm this, of the Constitution for the Federation of the Earth and the books you've written on it, it's that parliament that is the highest institution established in the Earth Constitution, which is us. The parliament is us, the people, so it should be the highest.
That's right. That's right. And I just want to follow up on that a little bit, David, with the idea that we don't have to solve all the most complicated problems ahead of time. We're already in the process, as we all know, of outlining the 1,000 world electoral districts, getting districts activated, electoral commissions activated within those districts, which are in turn within people within their own district are registering voters. Where I just came from in Venezuela, I'm wearing their flag today. I'll wear someone else's flag tomorrow. You know, I like all flags because nations are beautiful if they don't have these absolute borders, right? Cultures are beautiful if they don't have these absolute borders. People are beautiful if they don't have these absolute borders and militarized borders. You know, we affirm unity and diversity, as the Earth Constitution says. But you know, we're in Venezuela. They have 5 world electoral districts because of their population, which of the country. And Leopoldo Cook, who is our vice president for Latin America and the Caribbean, is registering organ groups in all these 5 districts. So we've got an emergent, you know, a country that's emerging with districts completing the whole country. And this is being done elsewhere in the world as well, so that we're in the process of anticipating these technical problems to make sure we have secure online voting, perhaps through, blockchain. But we're also at the same time elaborating the infrastructure that's necessary for an effective democratic world order. So, yeah, I'm excited.
Me too.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for that. I used to work in the IT sector, and I want to make an appeal to anybody watching to come forward and be a volunteer to help us manage this. There should be a particular committee of people setting policy, and then we should need to hire technical experts in both security and in actually creating these IDs that are unique, that are impenetrable, so that there's total credibility for having these world elections and that is the goal, and that's obvious. It has to be the case. So please consider that. I also want to ask folks watching this to go to our website and sign up to affirm the Constitution. And if you affirm the Constitution, you'll see it there. You just click that. Then that puts you into a database that makes you eligible to get one of these IDs. And we will be issuing those to you so that you can begin to think of yourself as a voter in world affairs. So there you have it. Now, I want to ask you guys in closing, we said we keep this brief this time. In closing, want to ask Glenn if he has something in closing, and then turn it to you, David, for the last word, since you're our special guest.
Thank you.
Okay, in closing, I just want to follow up, Byron, with what you started out with at the beginning of our talk today, and that is that we're working to develop the 16th session of the Provisional World Parliament in 2025. Probably it will be in Pondicherry, India. We have lots of connections in India, many people working on it there, developing this, and we want it. So this is a concrete thing and we want the preliminary functioning of voting. It doesn't have to be the final, fancy stuff, but we want people within their world electoral districts to vote for sending a delegate to the PWP in India next year, and so we're working on that, and we want groups, other World Federalist groups, World Citizens groups, and so on, to join with us and make that Provisional World Parliament something that's historical significance, that says to the world, the people of Earth are not just sitting by while everything collapses under the weight of capitalism, the weight of militarism. The people of Earth are there working, and we invite you to join with us. And the PWP can be a really significant historical event if we follow through on this as we expect to. So
awesome. Thank you. Over to you, David.
Yes. Well, I really appreciate the fact that we're working together to get to I would say, some of the root causes of our crisis in the world today, whether it's um, climate change or climate destruction, whether it's war and violence, whether it's injustice. I mean, you name it. These are all global issues that not one nation state can handle on its own. We're not living in a unipolar world anymore. And that's a good thing. And I would, on that point, and Glenn, you made this point a little bit earlier, that is, when you register as a world citizen or as a world voter, you're not giving up any other allegiance that you already have. You are just adding that additional awareness of your link to humanity and to the earth, and your love for your fellow humans and for the earth, and for the need that we have of a continued existence of a sustainable earth. You're not giving up anything. You're really just adding that. And I loved what you said, that you love different flags, Glenn, and that there's no problem really with the nations themselves. The problem is not the nations, but the anarchy between them that is the breeding ground of war. Gary would always say the phrase, peace is not the absence of war, it's the presence of law. And the Earth Constitution and the principles behind the world citizen government are all based upon world law, that we need this law to help us as humans to live together peacefully with each other and sustainably with the earth.
Right. Right.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. I just want to close by saying, think about it, folks. Who says you can't vote at the world's level? We have a right to do that. It's intrinsic. So these are the mechanisms, and this is the philosophy underlying it that you've heard today. And just want to thank again both David and Glenn for being here, and all my best to all of our friends who support us. Please come forward and form your world electoral districts, and please join up with what David's doing at his website. Become a world citizen officially, and get your passport and get your world citizen card to validate that, and carry it in your wallet.
Absolutely.
Yeah, here.
Here.
Oh.